Thank you, Professor Jasir. Thank you very much. It was really wonderful perspective and appreciated. Next, we have a sister speaker that I would like to introduce for Dr. Huda Abadi. She currently works at the Carter Center in Georgia. She has a graduate certificate from Duke, UNC, MA from Seton Hall University, and a PhD from Georgia State University. She has facilitated dialogue between Jewish and Muslim youth. She worked on curriculum development and youth interfaith dialogue. She has been involved with Muslim women's issues at Women's Islamic Initiative in Spirituality and Equality. She has published scholarly articles and taught at Georgia State, UNC. So please help me welcome Dr. Huda Abadi. And her topic is Intersectional Solidarity in Pursuit of Human Dignity.
Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May peace and blessings be upon you all. First, I want to thank the World for All Foundation and MAPS for having me. I'm very honored and humbled to be here amongst you tonight. It's also a privilege to share the stage with Ambassador Rasul and Dr. Jasir. Thank you. In the summer of 1999, I left Morocco to pursue my studies in the United States. As a young Muslim woman, Arab, North African, and Amazigh student living in Iowa during the horrific events of 9/11, I quickly realized that the Muslim label trumpeted all other labels. I was no longer identified as an international student, but rather as a Muslim, a label I started to embrace but also take more seriously. Being active in the community and talking to different churches, synagogues, mosques, I quickly came to the realization that much of the bigotry stemmed from fear and ignorance. The majority of Americans say they know very little or know nothing about Islam nor about our practices. I also realized that I cannot be defined mutually in an exclusive way. It doesn't reflect all the multi-layered facets and experiences of my life. I share common struggles with my sisters and brothers who come from different communities. 17 years later, I'm adding two different labels, one of a mother and an American. I am a proud mother of two smart little girls who question me on their own identity as American Muslims, but also question me on what they see in the news. And it breaks my heart when they ask questions such as, "Mom, why do they hate us?" or "Why do they hate Muslims?" Unfortunately, I come from a very deep red state, which is Georgia, so I'm not as lucky. Today, I would like to speak about three different things. One is the dangerous times we live in, and I'm not trying to be an alarmist. Two, why we need to change our narratives as Muslims. And lastly, how can we be unapologetically Muslim and build intersectional solidarity? Since 9/11, Muslim millennials have seen on almost a daily basis the word Islam or Muslims on the front line headlines. We find that post 9/11, the war on terrorism has directly led to greater Western media's attention on Muslim countries on issues related to religious extremism and radicalization. Our youth have grown up scrutinized because of their religion and the conflation between Islam and terrorism. What we see today is not a conflation only between Islam and terrorism, but also military interventions in the Middle East and North Africa, and dangerous tides of Islamophobia that we're witnessing today. Mothers have to take a conscious decision whether they can let their kids watch the news in fear that they might internalize what they see in their televisions, myself included. According to the Council of American Islamic Relations, hate crime and bias incidences are at an all-time high. This includes shootings, personal assaults, harassments, and attacks on houses of worship. Anti-Muslim bigotry has moved into the mainstream worse than 9/11. This is the reality we live in as Muslim Americans. Let's take a moment to reflect on what this might mean and the unintended consequences of such coverage, especially post-elections. According to the FBI and the SPLC, hate crimes against Muslims in the US surged 67%. 67%. And in 2015, the number of anti-Muslim hate crimes rose to the highest levels since the aftermath of 9/11. This approach sets the stage for Huntington's clash of civilization and becomes heightened due to the media's representation of the other. We have seen during the political campaigns that not only Islamic rhetoric remains socially acceptable, but actually used for political ends to spread fear, garner votes, and political leverage. The rise of hate crimes against Muslims or people that look Muslims has been marked by a year of Daesh's atrocities, ISIS, and on the other hand, Donald Trump's anti-Muslim rhetoric. The fact, though, is that the number one victims of Daesh, ISIS, have been Muslims. On the one side, we have to confront the use of religion that has been hijacked by groups such as Daesh, and on the other, we have to address the rise of Islamophobia. And whenever Muslim Americans are mentioned, it's either as threats or potential terrorists, or we have to be their friends so they can help us in the fight against terrorism. We are much more than that. As scholar Deepa Kumar stated, quote, the politics of liberal Islamophobia at the top of society enabled the extreme Islamophobia on the right. The far right was then able to capitalize on the atmosphere of racism, building its own ranks through the mechanics of scapegoating. End of quote. We are living in scary and crazy times. How can we be unapologetically Muslim in America? I argue that this is a tiring and challenging moment, but also an opportunity for us. Many of us went into post-election blues and are in this belief. Sisters and brothers, we can't just afford sitting back and being in our own bubbles. Surround yourself with aligned people and invest your time and attention in people who energize you. Islamophobia is about politics, and as such, we need to engage in that terrain. As the prominent pastor Martin Niemöller, who was an outspoken public foe of Hitler and spent his last 7 years of Nazi rule in concentration camps, stated, quote, "At first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." End of quote. In post-9/11, modern regimes of power operate to produce identifications that have been reinscribed by the state as tools of national security that marks arbitrary threats which can be transported from one marginal body to the next. How can we discursively work together to disrupt the silencing and marginalization of various communities? And how can we become active agents instead of passive victims? As we reflect on what this means for our nation, it's most important that we stand up in solidarity with all of those that have been targeted by Trump. It's time for us to change our narrative and connect our struggle to the wider social justice struggle for communities of color and other minorities. We have one common struggle, and together, only together, we are stronger for the path of dignity. Social justice in Islam does not mean social justice for Muslims only. It's social justice for all. We cannot focus solely on issues that relate to Muslims while letting our Black, Latino, and Native American sisters and brothers and other minorities fend for themselves on policies and laws that negatively affect them. We are one in this struggle. Together, we are no longer a minority, but a marginalized majority. We might be defined in mutually exclusive ways, but that only generates artificial distinctions and serve conflicting political agendas. We need to move away from single issues and efforts must be expanded to make the practice of intersectional awareness a routine for a sustainable, non-exclusive social justice initiative. What kind of Muslims will we be? What type of allies? Do we just take an issue that fits our agenda? For instance, do we rally and mobilize only when our Muslim brothers are wrongfully locked up in prison? Or do we tackle the structural racism and the industrial prison complex and rally for our countless innocent Black and Latino young brothers who are locked up also? Oftentimes, we hear about human rights. We think it's a concept that comes from the West. Muslims do not need to choose between their religion and universal values. Values such as human rights and social justice are inherent in Islam. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a social activist, he was a feminist, and he has taught us to stand up for all of those who are marginalized. In the Quran, we are referred to as the dignified human beings, not as only Muslims or as believers, but as human beings, so we share one humanity. The Quran states, "O humankind, surely we have created you from one male and female, and made you into tribes and clans so that you might get to know each other. The noblest of you with God are the ones that are most devout." This means that all humankind is a family of sisters and brothers equal before God, differentiated only by our actions. In the last sermon of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, "All mankind is from Adam and Eve. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab has any superiority over an Arab. Also, a white has no superiority over a black, nor a black has any superiority over a white, except by piety and good action." If we reread carefully the Prophet's last sermon in its entirety, and it's in its own historical context, when there was still slavery, we will see that this is one of the earliest declarations of human rights and social justice. The Prophet addressed core universal values in a society where those values were forgotten or systemically violated. These include restoring women's dignity, fighting bigotry, closing the gap between the rich and the poor, and stopping bloodshed. Before God, we are all one. So why are we not following the Prophet's footsteps? As Muslims, we also need to be united from within. We can't allow ourselves, especially now in this political context, to be divided and to be seen as either quote-unquote good versus bad Muslim. We are not a uniform monolith. We need to engage with diversity and be inclusive of one another. We can't keep arguing on who represents the real Islam. This is what Daesh and the likes want, and us and them. Some of us are more visible Muslims than others, but we all have an important role to play. When voices within a movement are marginalized, where they don't even think it is for them, the only result is a weakened and an ineffective movement. We have to prioritize fighting racism, white supremacy, sexism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, etc. We need to mobilize as many people as possible to stand together in solidarity against bigotry and violence. It is difficult to be a Muslim right now in the United States. However, we need to remember that we are not alone in this struggle. We have to take this as a historical moment, as an opportunity to establish a human sisterhood and brotherhood. This is the time for us to be seen and heard. We need to be unapologetically Muslim and populate the media spaces if possible. We have to tell our own stories and not wait on someone else to tell our stories. We can't let ourselves be otherized, and we can't feel like we don't belong. We belong here and we are here to stay. Muslims have contributed to the fabric of our nation since its founding. It's a story we must keep repeating ourselves. What we need is a strategy in intersectional solidarity movement. We have to start building bridges and to work together. We need to be able to say that Black lives matter and that it is our struggle too. The first person to call and text me and see how I was feeling after Trump's election was my white Christian friend whom I've known since my PhD days. Not only I received comforting messages, but he made it a point that he will be an active ally and fight this bigotry with the privilege that he has and I don't have. I want to share a quote from the text he wrote. Quote, "When anyone says negative and racist things about Islam and Muslims, I tell them that the most brilliant, strong woman I've ever known is actually a Muslim. And she is the most amazing mother I have seen. But if you just marked her by her religion and her ethnicity, you would count her down when she's capable of much more and just as human as anyone else on this planet. I just worry, Huda, because people would challenge all you are in the name of a label that they don't understand or try to engage with." End of quote. His words touched me and made me realize the importance of allies and working across religious divides, and I know he has my back. So we are not alone in this fight. Allies are important. For my bachelor's degree, I want to share a small story. I went to Luther College, which is in the middle of Iowa. We were no more than 15 to 20 Muslim students in a campus of 2,000. I signed up to be a student worker in the religion department. Over the next years, I've developed close relationships with my professors from the department, but especially one professor who was an American Christian who taught Bible studies and Intro to Islam. I took his class and we started talking regularly and tried to make sense of Islam post 9/11. We organized workshops and invited scholars to campus to deliver lectures in Islam and on interfaith. During that time, I wanted to start a Muslim student association in my campus. Of course, there were challenges. It's a Lutheran college, and I needed help. My biggest ally was my Christian professor, who not only supported the Muslim students, but became our official faculty advisor up to this day. The impact of the exchange between Muslim and Christian not only opened doors to Muslim students, but also assisted him in his own personal journey. His experiences made him reflect and write his book titled, "Was Jesus Really a Muslim?" He argued that Islam is a better fit for Jesus, since Islam is not a religion as a concept as understood from a Western framework of religion definition. But he said it's more of a social justice movement. And he came to the conclusion in his book that it's because Islam for him is more of a social justice movement, and this is what Jesus was in the first century, then Jesus is more of a Muslim. Why am I sharing this story? Because this was an unlikely story if someone told me about it, but I experienced it firsthand. In the United States Constitution, every single religion should have the right to exist and express itself. Struggle for that. If you accept discrimination, it's over. You have to be at the forefront of the struggle for yourself and for other religions. Organizing people on grassroots will change the balance of power to bring the necessary positive change. We are greater than our individual differences, and we cannot lose hope. When we fall, we just have to get up and fight harder and with more resolve. Our youth are looking at us to see how we respond, and I have two little ones looking at me. It's on us to provide a source of strength and courage to continue this fight. We should be unapologetically who we are and proud to be. We can take this as an opportunity to work harder, mobilize, and move forward. And I conclude by saying that only by forging bonds of solidarity with other multiracial, marginalized communities and allies can we really successfully defeat Islamophobia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Huda Abadi. Thank you for your wonderful speech and for all the efforts you have undertaken to fight extremism, including extreme ideologies within Islam. So we appreciate your work. So now we're going to break for prayer, inshallah. And once we come back from prayer, we'll have Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool, who will give a speech, and then we'll have a Q&A. So we'll pass out the cards to you to write down your questions after we come back. So we'll be back in about 20 minutes.